is Jennifer Burke, and I am so excited to introduce Dr. Reshma Shah, board-certified pediatrician and co-author of the book Nourish. In Dr. Shah's book, Nourish, she talks about getting your family together so that everybody can eat healthy. I know that's something I'm super excited to learn about. Also, how to do quick meals for the whole family. We have picky husbands, picky children, so those are always a constant struggle for families and for me. I started plant-based the end of October, and I have lost about 17 pounds, but the most that I'm struggling with is the weekends with my family and getting them off of all these bad foods. So I am so excited to learn more from Dr. Shah. So we welcome you, Dr. Shah.
Welcome, Dr. Shah. So let's put her in spotlight and we'll get her first question. We're so glad you're here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be with you today.
You know, Jennifer spoke to your book and some of the things that she's been learning about from it. Can you take, we've met Brenda Davis and one of our more recent, I guess it was January Zoom. And so we know a little bit about it from her. And we wondered if maybe you might just take a minute and just tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it was such an honor and really a professional highlight for me to work with Brenda on this book. And Brenda and I came together to write this book because we sort of shared a mission of wanting to support families to be successful in their endeavors to move more towards a plant-based diet. And the book is certainly for families that are already, you know, fully plant-based or vegan, but we also wanted it to be for families that might just be starting or just beginning the journey. So no matter where you are in the process, there's something for you in this book. And we divided the book into 4 key sections. And the first section of the book is called Consideration. And it's really about the why you might consider a plant-based diet. And we go through, you know, we spend a lot of time talking about all the health advantages, but then we also talk about, you know, some of the environmental advantages. Yesterday was Earth Day, so it's a perfect time to be talking about it. And then also the ethical considerations around our food choices. And then the second section of the book is called Care, and it's really about all those nutrition specifics that parents want. And we wrote it so that it's really comprehensive in what it covers. You know, so often I would read books about nutrition and the last line would be, you know, ask your pediatrician. And I kept thinking, oftentimes your pediatrician doesn't know. And so we really wanted to provide all the specific details. And it's meant, you know, certainly to be read, but it's also meant to be a reference. You can come back and say, you know, what was that thing about B12 or what do I need to remember about omega-3s? So the second section of the book really has all the details that parents might want to know about in terms of nutritional requirements and all those nitty-gritty details. And then the third section of the book is about confidence. It's about all the issues that parents and families face around their dinner tables, from picky eating to pediatric weight-related issues to really how to begin to transition your family towards a plant-based diet. And then the very last section is about connection, and it's about the common practical tips that parents are looking for, menu planning, and then we have over 50 plant-based recipes. So we really wanted it to be a comprehensive guide. In fact, our page count got so sort of expansive, we had to ask our publisher for extra pages, which luckily they gave to us. So.
Extra pages, boy, that sounds, I bet a publisher loved that.
You know, we were really nervous to ask them, but we said we really, I mean, we asked for 100 extra pages and they gave it to us. So we were very fortunate to have that.
Oh, that is neat. Vicki, I think, is Vicki with us now? Because I know she had.
I'm here.
Didn't you have a question?
I did. And it comes up oftentimes in some of the Facebook groups that I help with, but obesity is such a big factor now. And people walk a really fine line with children, because where do you draw the line? You don't want your child to remain obese. And some people have children that are obese, but they also don't want to create a stigma around what they're eating. Where is that line, and how is that best handled?
I'm so glad that you asked this question, because it's been in writing the book and in talking to not only parents, but also to other healthcare providers. I think it's a really important and relevant topic. And we dedicate a whole chapter in the book to pediatric weight-related issues. And what I would say is that we know that diet and nutrition plays a critical role in health. And parents, they're motivated by wanting to have their children thrive and be healthy. So I have a lot of compassion and empathy for parents that might be struggling with this issue. And I think it's important to support parents and not sort of blame them for how they might be handling it. I think they're doing the best that they can. And really, when it comes down to it, our aim as parents is not to control the size of our children or the size of their bodies. Really what it is to provide them with the tools, the resources, the food, and the connection that allows them to maintain a healthy lifestyle. And so weight is not something that we can necessarily control for our children. What we can do is model the behavior, promote healthy choices, and a healthy lifestyle. And I think it's really important to not encourage or promote dieting in children. It can be really, really harmful. Oftentimes what I see is, I can't tell you the number of parents that have come up to me and said, especially parents who may be struggling with their weight, that a lot of their struggles began when someone in their childhood decided to put them on a diet, whether it was a well-intentioned parent or pediatrician, because it changes the way that children sort of look at food, that the way that they look at themselves. And at the end of the day, we want to preserve a loving connection with our child. And studies have shown that the more parents restrict certain foods, so, you can't have sugar, you can't have this, you can't have that. The more parents restrict certain foods, the more children want those foods and are inclined to eat them. And so it ends up having the opposite effect of what parents are really trying to do, which is to create sort of a healthy eating environment. So I think that absolutely no dieting or diet talk in childhood. We offer children a variety of healthy choices, provide them with the structure that they need. Oftentimes, I think one of the missing things in family dynamics when it comes to food is structure around feeding. Just as we provide our children structure around sleeping and television and video games, they need some structure around food. And what that means is having scheduled meals and snacks, coming to the table, not eating in a distracted fashion, and having some room and flexibility for fun foods. I think that's part of it. And the more that you sort of take away the tension of good food, bad food, it creates this dynamic that's so stressful for parents, and it feels really awful for children. And so trying to get away from that language of good food, bad food, and really promoting, those family meals, cooking at home, offering a lot of variety of foods. I found that in my own family, the more that we talk about food, it just becomes this really tense, anxious kind of environment. But if you sort of cut up a tray of vegetables and leave them out on the kitchen table and your kids are hungry right before dinner, it's a great time. They're going to just grab it. And kids want ease and convenience. So if you have a fruit bowl, if you have cut up vegetables, they're more inclined to eat it. That's kind of a long-winded way of answering your question, but I think it's really important to emphasize and promote a positive body image, promote a healthy relationship with food, and not focus on restriction, and certainly not putting our kids on diets, because it ends up backfiring in the long run.
Dr. Shah, this is Debbie. I was part of a committee here in Polk County several years back. Our metropolitan statistical area was deemed the 7th most obese in the nation. And one of the things that we looked at all aspects of health as a community group. And one of the focuses was on the medical practices that physicians never did bring up with patients. Their weight and their body mass index. And from what I'm hearing, and maybe you're just referring to pediatrics, but, are physicians actually having conversations, with the parents and possibly how to deal with this, as a parent, how they should deal with that.
Yeah. And I think it is kind of what we talked about before. It's like a fine balance, right? You don't want to completely ignore the issue, but at the same time, what I see over and over again in clinical practices is that people just focus on the BMI. And the BMI is one tool an enormous toolbox. So just looking at the BMI and saying your child's BMI is elevated and something needs to be done about it. And the parents kind of leave the office like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this information? And it's not difficult to understand that the way that sometimes parents perceive that is, oh, that means I need to put my kid on a diet. But really what you want, the BMI is just an indication that you may need to have a conversation. And what I look at in terms of BMI is not necessarily the exact number. Like not every kid is going to be exactly 50th percentile, but what you want to look at is that child's growth over time. So has there been a steady upward rise in the BMI? Is the BMI dropping? And then having a conversation. Tell me about what a day of food looks like in your family. What areas do you feel are easy? What areas are you struggling? And it's really about an opportunity for conversation. But so often what I see is people look at the BMI, they make a judgment, and then that's the sole focus of the conversation. And I actually think that having those conversations in front of children can be pretty damaging. I can't tell you the number of grown adults that have come to me and said, my disordered eating began when my pediatrician said that I was overweight or obese. That can be really damaging for a child to hear. So I think the BMI is a tool, and we should use it like that. And it's an opportunity to have a conversation with the family, find out where they're at, and in what ways you can support them.
Dr. Shah, one question came up in the chat box about families being stressed with after-school activities, and how can parents, especially moms who do the bulk of the work, the meal prep, how can they manage this?
Yeah, I mean, I have 2 teenagers, and so I can totally relate to what this looks like in the household between work and after school activities. When is dinner time supposed to when are you supposed to cook dinner? When is it supposed to happen? And how do you sort of make that a priority? And one of the things that I would say is that you need to start the habit early on of having these sort of regular family meals, but also give yourself a little bit of compassion, because, if you've got 2 kids with 2 different practices at 2 different times, it can be a struggle to get it all done. And in the book, we talk about these sort of easy meals. Every night does not have to be a gourmet meal. So do things. I oftentimes when my kids were, now I've got drivers in the house, so it's a little bit easier. But when I was doing the bulk of sort of getting them to place, if you know that Tuesday is a day where you're late at work, kids both have practices, and it's just going to be hectic, that's a night where you want to count on leftovers or put something in the crock pot. You need to have a little bit of planning and preparation. I think without some planning and preparation, it's virtually impossible. But the planning and preparation doesn't mean that you have to have sort of a gourmet meal every night. Sometimes it can just be rice and beans and a salad,
Is it helpful to engage the children if they're old enough and can use the proper tools in a safe manner to engage them in the meal prep?
Oh, absolutely. My biggest challenge as a parent has been, I have a lot of compassion for my kids. I feel like their schedules are so much busier than mine was as a child. And so I think that when they're young, get them in the kitchen as much as possible. You want to teach them some skills so that they're able to prepare a meal on their own, that they are self-sufficient in that way. But as they get older, I think, doing it in a way that's going to really work for the family. Oftentimes what I see is families will say, you must do this and you must do that. And the honest truth is, in my family, at least, the kids are often busier than I am. And so they're in some way, shape, or form, they must help. So whether it's with meal prep, and if it's not with meal prep, they're definitely helping with cleanup after dinner. So you definitely want to get them involved as much as possible and as consistently as possible. And in our house, everyone has their sort of assigned duties after dinner so that cleanup goes a little bit more swiftly. But I think that when they have time, when they're on spring break, summer break, or if they have a lighter schedule, absolutely get them in the kitchen and have them cook dinner for the family.
Reshma, one of the questions that came up was from Denise, and I'm going to ask Denise to unmute because I want to be sure she got what she needed on this. Denise, can you unmute yourself?
Sure. The question was mostly answered. I'm not a parent, so I've never had to deal with that. I have to deal with me. But I do know that families, especially most households, are head up by single mothers. Single mothers do it all and burn themselves out in the process. So practicality, reality is a parent trying to feed their kids is hard enough than to have to come up with all these not so easily prepared foods to keep their children nutritious. Yes, involve your children in the cooking process. Children who, especially young children who are involved with meal prep, like for vegetables, will eat vegetables.
Yes.
Because children don't like to eat vegetables. I grew up, unfortunately, eating more canned because it was easy for mom, who wasn't a single parent, to open up the can and throw it in the pot than to do the fresh. We had a produce stand right downstairs from our apartment. But fresh is more expensive, and you're feeding a family of 7, that's hard. But yes, I believe in involving children in teaching them the skills and getting them involved in their eating regimen makes a lot of sense. For me, I'm disabled. I need 2 knees, basically, 2 knee replacements. I have a deformed right knee. It's osteo. It's not related to rheumatoid arthritis. So just mobility wise, trying to get around to try and do food prep is a challenge. And I don't want to do it because of that. It's not that I don't like to cook. I like to cook. I'm a good cook. I like seasonings. I like spices. I like to play with different things. But the thought of having to stand there, because I can't, my kitchen's a galley kitchen, you can't sit in it, to stand there and do all this food prep is a major, major challenge.
Denise, I'm so glad you brought that up because one of the things that I like so much about the book, and maybe Reshma, this might be a time to talk about it, are your almost instant meals. And that might be a good thing for Denise. Can you share that?
Yeah, and I think it sort of goes back to, one of the things that Brenda and I really wanted to focus on was that this book is accessible for you wherever you are in your journey. And I understand you don't have kids, and obviously the focus of the book is on kids, but I think a lot of the tools and tips are relevant to anybody. I think that sometimes in the plant-based community, there's this idea that you should never eat processed foods, but sometimes having certain things that are minimally processed, like I know, for instance, Trader Joe's has these frozen brown rice packs. And so the rice is already cooked. You just have to sort of put it in the microwave. So I think having some sort of pre-made or prepped ingredients can really go a long way. The other thing is I'm a huge fan of if I'm spending time in the kitchen cooking, I cook more than I need. And then if some people don't like to eat the same thing throughout the week, so you could freeze a bunch. And simple things like even overnight oats, I make it for the week and it's kind of set and I'm in the kitchen for 10, 15 minutes and you've got your oats for the whole week. So focusing on simple strategies and really having compassion for yourself and doing what you can and with the resources that you have, whether it's mobility or time or patience or, money, all those things, it's going to look different for every family. And so I don't think there's one exact right way to do it. Some people love to batch cook and some people think that it's, it takes up too much time on the weekend. So in our family, we do sort of some combination of the two. And then there are times that we do take out from time to time too. And I think having some compassion and joy and not too much judgment around it is really, really important.
Okay. Ken, did you have a question? Because you were thinking on that. You might have had to step away. Okay.
No, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, I just turned the camera back on. Okay, Dr. Shaw, can you comment on supplements that might be beneficial for prevention or whatever of COVID?
I think that a lot of the information on COVID, this idea that if you take, this particular supplement that you're going to sort of protect yourself from COVID, I think we have to be really careful with that because we don't really have a lot of evidence and data to suggest it. What we do know is that healthy lifestyle behavior. So I'm always reluctant to sort of recommend, believe, or promote a magic pill sort of a solution to anything. I think what we are seeing with COVID and what hopefully will persist once COVID is completely sort of not overtaking our lives is this idea that healthy lifestyle behaviors, focusing on plant-based foods like vegetables and fruits and legumes and all these things, leading a physically active life, trying to decrease stress, all these things help us to maintain our overall health. And so I, in terms of a specific supplement to prevent or treat COVID, I'm not convinced of that, but I do believe that people eating a plant-based diet, leading a healthy lifestyle, maintaining a healthy weight, being physically active, not smoking, this reduces your risk of a lot of chronic diseases. And we know that having an underlying chronic condition puts you at greater risk of death and complications from COVID.
Oh, and I want to ask the question that comes up right after that. And to do it, I'm going to share my screen real quick because I thought this was very interesting. This is from the World Obesity Federation, and it kind of speaks to what you were just saying, that they found that the countries that had half the population or more overweight, and the US is, what is it, 70%, Reshma, is that right?
It's close to it, yeah.
Yeah, and then they're less physically active, and you were talking about that, but they consume higher levels of ultra-processed foods. And so I was wondering if maybe you could, because I saw that in your book, there was a scale of what's unprocessed versus ultra-processed. Can you speak to that to kind of help us understand?
Yeah, so obviously, eating foods in their whole source, like broccoli or green beans or a mango. I mean, it doesn't require an ingredient list. You kind of know what it is. And that's probably, the way to go with most of our food. And then I think there's this idea that all processed foods are bad versus, unprocessed foods being good. But the truth is, it's that some processed foods actually add nutritional quality to our overall diet. So one example would be when you have children, typically at a year of age, when children are being weaned off of breast milk or formula, they transition to sort of whole fat cow's milk. And obviously for plant-based families, that's not an option. And you might choose something like a soy milk. And using a fortified soy milk, so a soy milk that's fortified with vitamin D and calcium and maybe B12 and some of the other nutrients that can be difficult to sort of achieve in a plant-based diet, actually adds to the overall nutritional quality. So if you're feeding your child fortified soy milk that's got calcium, it's probably a better option than having, not, because it can be difficult to meet a child's calcium requirements through food alone, especially at that age when you're developing, picky eaters. So in some instances, processed foods, and I put that in air quotes because, you're adding nutritional quality is not such a bad thing. And the more you go towards sort of removing the fiber and the other nutrients and adding in things like added sugar and salt and things like that, you kind of skew the healthfulness of a food. One caveat I will say for children is sometimes having foods that are too high in fiber. So you might want to always choose like whole grains and things like that. But for young children, for young children, having too high a fiber amount in their diet can actually get in the way of their growth. Because if you imagine their stomachs are pretty small, and if they fill up on a lot of fiber, they don't have room for as much calories. So using some more refined grains or refined foods or concentrated fats in young children can be helpful for their overall growth. And then the final thing I'll say, so you want to sort of trend towards, unprocessed, minimally processed foods. But at the same time, and this goes back to the previous question about being overly restrictive, I think, cake at your birthday or an occasional treat out can also be part of a healthy diet. And what we emphasize for children and especially for people who may not have a lot of underlying health conditions is having a little bit of flexibility can actually increase the enjoyment of the diet and can help to sort of prevent a lot of these disordered eating patterns. Now, if you've got a lot of chronic conditions like heart disease or diabetes, it's going to look a little different. But focusing on minimally processed, unprocessed foods, and then having a little bit of flexibility for some of the more heavily processed foods is probably what I would recommend for children and for people that don't have a lot of underlying chronic medical conditions.
I got a real kick out of that part about with the little ones, you have to be careful not to feed them too fibrous of foods because it fills them up. And I thought, but when you're older,
yes,
that's a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah.
Because that keeps us, so it's good to eat what, apples and and kale and beans and all those things that have all that fiber in them. So we can do the opposite when we get older.
Yeah, and that's not to say that we should not be giving our children fiber. Fiber is absolutely important, and for the vast majority of children in the United States are eating a low fiber diet. So for most children, adding fiber, whether it's adding a salad or fruit or oatmeal, is absolutely important. I've just seen sometimes people go to the extreme, and sometimes kids can have difficulty gaining weight. So fiber is absolutely important and critical, even for our youngest eaters. We just don't want to overdo it.
Yeah, that sounds good. Linda, you had a question.
Yes, Dr. Shah, do you ever have a opportunity to just mention in a conversation that maybe it's not in the lens of obvious that the child is obese, but just the healthy eating habits in general? How do you approach that where the parent may not be aware, because that's not something you learn in school so much anymore? So how do you approach those conversations just for a prevention perspective, from a prevention perspective?
The easiest entry point is actually not prevention. It's for treatment. So if I have a kid that's coming in with a specific concern or complaint that might be related to diet, I find that's the easiest entry point. And for children, that topic tends to be constipation. Constipation is such a common and frequent problem in the pediatric population. And that's probably the easiest place for me to start, because, the more often than not, I would say in the vast majority of kids, it's an issue of fiber. So, and when you're increasing the fiber in a diet, it's all the foods that we talk about. Mm-hmm. Whole plant foods that are minimally processed have fiber. So constipation is really a great entry point. I think otherwise, in pediatrics especially, what we have been trained oftentimes when we talk about diet and nutrition with family from a prevention standpoint, it's really embarrassing to admit, but the most common question is, are you getting 3 servings of dairy a day? Because people want to make sure that kids are getting calcium and vitamin D. And, do you eat some fruits and vegetables? Are you getting 3 servings of dairy? And that's the end of the conversation. I like to sort of ask parents, tell me what a typical day of food looks like in your family. And that's you're not sort of probing, or you're just trying to get an idea, and really to try and highlight some of the wonderful things that you see. I see that you love apples, or I see that you love carrots. Tell me some more vegetables or fruits that you like. And then really talking to parents about ways to improve the overall quality of the diet by introducing more of those whole plant foods. And typically in my clinical practice, I don't talk about being plant-based or vegan or vegetarian, because those words can seem very foreign to a lot of families, but it's really the components of a healthy diet, including lots of fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and trying to introduce more plant sources of protein. I think over the last 5 years, there's been an explosion in the conversation around plant-based foods. So I would say 5-10 years ago, it was a little more awkward of a conversation, but nowadays I think parents are much more savvy. And I think the environmental movement has helped tremendously, because people are becoming increasingly aware of the environmental choices, the environmental impact of our food choices. And that focus has definitely been on plant versus animal sources of protein.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that approach, because you're building common ground. You, yes, as a physician, are concerned about the child's health, and obviously the parent is there concerned as well. So what a great opportunity just to introduce a parent that may not herself or himself be aware of the fabulous benefits of a plant-based diet. So,
and I think it's really important. I've never met a parent that doesn't want the best for their child.
Exactly.
So if their child is struggling, have compassion. You don't know their life circumstances. I think oftentimes we're very quick to judge how a parent might be feeding their child, but we don't know their life circumstances. I'll never forget, I'll share this clinical experience I had years and years ago. This is when I was back in Cleveland. I was working at the Children's Hospital, and I was supervising one of the residents, and the resident came back to tell me about his encounter with the family. And you could tell the resident was so frustrated. He said, "Oh, this mom is just not listening. She's on her phone. I'm trying to talk to her about the diet of the child because I think the kid's overweight." And you could tell the resident was just so frustrated. And so I thought, well, let's go back in and let's talk to the family together. So I went in the room. Sure enough, the mom's on her phone And she is not interested in having this conversation. And in fact, she's quite irritated. And so I sort of stopped the conversation. I look at her and I said, "You seem frustrated. Can you tell me about what's going on?" And she looks up at me and she said, "He's talking to me about fruits and vegetables. I have to go to, I have to take 3 buses to get to the grocery store. And then I have to find a way to get those groceries back to my house. I'm working 2 jobs." And I mean, the list just went on and on and on. And so the moment that we pass judgment or we think that we know that person's life circumstance, we've ended the conversation. And so you have to really, I think, approach parents with compassion and really ask permission to help. Because if you go in thinking you know what they should be doing, you've lost trust and you've lost that connection. And so we kind of backed the conversation. I said, "That sounds really hard. That sounds so hard. And I can't imagine having to take 3 buses to get food for my family. Tell me about the grocery store that's close to you. What food do you have available to you?" And then working from there. So really trying to hold, back any kind of judgment, having compassion for the family, and understanding that every parent wants the best for their child.
So good listening skills and problem solving skills.
Yes. Yeah. And the thing is, the other thing that I've realized is that sometimes we feel like we have to sort of solve the problem in the moment, but oftentimes the best conversations happen when, the parent may not be ready. And what you say, instead of saying, "Well, they're not interested, I'm not going to talk to them anymore," is say, "That sounds really hard. If you change your mind and you want to talk about this, let me know." And you find gentle ways. And then it might not be the first visit or the second visit, but maybe the 5th or the 7th, that they say, "You remember that thing that you talked about? Like, how could I do that?" Or, "These are my constraints. How can I do some more fruits and vegetables? What would be a way?" And you have to sort of build a relationship.
I was just thinking as you were talking, wouldn't we all love a physician who listened to us where we were coming from
Yes.
and then gave us suggestions on how we could overcome that.
Yeah.
And it
And
doesn't.
I also, on the other end, I have a lot of compassion for physicians too, because I'm actually not seeing patients clinically right now. I took some time off for the book and trying to figure out next steps. But, we are expected to do a lot in the context of 15 minutes.
Yeah.
For me, I would love to be able to, I guarantee you most doctors want more time with their patients. But it's really difficult because between the, bookkeeping, the medical records, the billing, all the stuff that we have to do within the span of 15 minutes, it's really, really difficult. So I have a lot of compassion on both ends, from the parents and from the pediatricians. And I think that's one of the reasons that Brenda and I wrote the book. And it's also one of the reasons that Brenda and I try to do a lot on our Instagram pages. It's not like a one-on-one consultation, but it allows people to, sort of get their questions answered in a more nuanced way, in a more, longer form conversation than the 10 to 15 minutes you might. And, nutrition is one part of the visit. Immunizations and ADHD and developmental delay and learning problems and all the things that we have to sort of manage within the context of a 15-minute office visit. Yeah. So it's challenging on both ends.
Reshma, in the book, you spoke about Sheetpan meals.
Oh, yes.
And just in case people haven't read your book, do you want to go into a few details about your sheet pans?
Yeah, so I love Sheetpan meals because basically your oven does the work. And so the idea is that you can really compose a whole meal on a sheet pan. And if you've got like a bigger family, you might need to do 2 sheet pans. But I usually try to think of like, sort of a plant-based protein source, vegetables, grains. And so like a quick and easy sheet pan meal would be if you had sort of marinated baked tofu with some sweet potatoes and roasted broccoli. So kind of you prep it with whatever seasonings you want, you put it on your sheet pan, you put it in the oven, and it's basically done. So you can do an entire dinner that way, but you could also do components of a dinner that way. So you might, cook some quinoa or some brown rice on the stovetop, or some beans on the stovetop, and then, a tray of roasted vegetables. One of my favorite things to do, our market day, I usually go to our farmer's market on Sunday. So by Friday, Saturday, we're sort of running very low on produce. And so I'll gather bits and pieces. I might have a red pepper and some zucchini, a few mushrooms, and I will just take all the vegetables that are sort of left through the week and then put them on a tray and roast them. And roasting really brings out the sweetness. And you can, season it with some smoked paprika or cumin or thyme or fresh herbs. So I love it when my oven does the work for me.
And what would be your kids' favorite meal?
I've got 2 kids. So my one kid is basically, if I do a stir fry, he's pretty happy. So that's the sort of quick and easy meal to go to. And then they love the typical kid stuff, taco nights and things like that. But obviously we do it sort of plant-based and kind of the same rotations. And then every now and then we'll try like a new thing. I think the latest thing, the Share's Eyes came up with a new book, the 21, is it the Alzheimer's Solution, their recipe book. And they have a recipe in there for these Mediterranean gigante beans. And my family's been obsessed with them. So lately we've been making that quite a bit.
And what was the name of that again? Because I've got that new book.
It's their Alzheimer's Solution. I think it's the 21-day Alzheimer's Solution. And it's the beginning of the book has, they've got some information, but most of the book is just recipes, and the recipes look beautiful. And I can tell you for sure that the Greek gigante beans, that recipe is delicious.
Do your kids cook? Do they do the cooking sometimes?
They do off and on. My son, he takes on he doesn't cook very often, but when he does, he'll take on these big projects. Like he'll want to sort of make something. He makes this recipe it's called mapa tofu. And he'll make it. Sometimes he'll make it for lunch. They've been sort of off and on in terms of going to school, staying home with COVID. And so he'll go to town and he'll just make the whole recipe from scratch, and he'll clean up and stuff. But it's sporadic based on their schedules, but they definitely, both of them could, if I asked them to cook dinner, I have full confidence that they could do it.
Oh, great. We need to have some cooking schools for kids.
I think part of it is just getting them, inviting them into the kitchen with you. And right. And really the most important thing is for parents to model the behavior. If you are, always doing takeout and just whatever, they're not going to know that it's part of pretty much any habit that you're trying to instill in your children. It comes from being a role model, whether it's, an exercise routine or healthy sleep habits or cooking. When they see you do it, they know that's just how their family does things.
Well, and that's true. And if you raise your children that supper comes from the drive-through, that's where they're going to expect supper to come from. That's very true.
Exactly.
Very true.
One of the things that people always ask me about, I'm really a big proponent of family meals, and we have a whole chapter dedicated to family meals and the importance of family meals. And a lot of times parents will say, well, how did you get your children to participate in regular family meals? And I think when your kids are older, to sort of go backwards is more challenging. But in our house, it was just like putting on your seatbelt. It's like, it's just something you do. And so family dinner has always been non-negotiable in our house. Like we always, everyone that's home, we come together at dinner, and they've never objected to it because it's just like brushing your teeth or putting on your seatbelt. It's just a thing that we do in our family.
When I was growing up, we had one night a week that nobody was allowed to go out. Everybody stayed home, and it changed different weeks. There were different things going on, but every week, one night that week, nobody was allowed to go out. Everybody stayed home. And sometimes it was to eat. Sometimes it was to watch movies, whatever. But there was one night a week that nobody was allowed to go out.
Yeah.
I didn't like it then, but I think it's great now.
Oh, it's so important. I think those rituals and routines are important. And even if our teenagers object, trust me, they need it.
Yeah, I did. Do we have any more questions? We've got one question here from Italian moms. Oh, I guess it's not a question, it's a statement. Italian moms favor their sons and teach their sons to cook. Their sons learn to cook from mama. So
that's great.
So Dr. Shah, it sounds like this really kind of boils down to getting the families to plan, the planning piece, and trying to work around busy schedules. And the more plans that, do you have a time, or how do you go about planning your weekly meals with your family? How does that work for you at your house?
And it's changed through the years. When my kids were much younger, in some ways, like you're just so busy, just like running after them and doing that. Now my kids are older, and I actually, I'm much more relaxed about it because I have more time myself, because they don't sort of need me in those ways. But typically what I like to do is I have, and especially we've all been sort of trying to limit how often we're going to grocery stores, is I have one day of the week that is my major sort of grocery shopping endeavor. And for me, that's Sunday, because that's when our local farming is. I'm there pretty much every single Sunday. And so what I usually do is I like to look at the week and have a rough idea of what I'm planning to make. And I like to have a little flexibility because unexpected things come
Right.
up. But I make sure to try and have the ingredients for at least 3 to 4 dinners throughout the week. One night it might be like tacos or a stir fry or whatever the case may be, and make sure that I stock up on those ingredients. And then it can kind of change. It can have a little bit of flexibility. When my kids were younger, I really wanted to stay on that schedule, because without it, it was just like every night at dinner, like, what are we going to make? And I think when we are prepared, we are just more calm and we can make sort of more balanced choices. It's like when it's 6 o'clock, you have no idea what's for dinner. That's when we reach up for the takeout menu, which is fine. Sometimes we do that as well. But so Sunday is my typical planning day. I have a little note card system. So I just take an index card, and on one side I write down the days of the week, roughly what we're planning. Sometimes I plan leftovers. So I know that this dinner, if it's a big soup or stew, I know it makes enough for 2 dinners. So I might just say, well, this can be leftovers, and I'll add, a grain or a vegetable to that. And then let my menu plan dictate my grocery list. And the other thing I like to do is when I'm going to the grocery store, is to plan my grocery list according to the layout. So I can just kind of walk through. So I do fruits and vegetables, and, you just kind of walk through. So that's typically how I like to do it. And I know some people really rely on batch cooking, and they use their weekends to really just make all the sauces and beans and things like that. And sometimes, having a big batch of beans and grains and things like that cooked in advance really helps. And I always try to cook more than I need for that meal, so that we have leftovers, whether it's for a second dinner or for lunches, things like that. Great. And I also think it's important to have fun in the kitchen. If you tell yourself that cooking is a chore and you really don't like it, it just becomes sort of a drag. But having a sense of, fun and joy around it can really help. I can tell you that the times when I feel rushed and I'm like, oh, I have to cook dinner, and I'm just the food doesn't taste as good.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Well, I don't know who has noticed that Kathy is gone, but she lost internet.
Oh, no.
So she is trying to log back in on her iPad, but I'm assuming Rob must be gone too, because they lost internet. So if anybody have any more questions that you can type in the chat box. Debbie, didn't you have another question? I thought there was a question that came up behind mine.
Okay. I wanted to I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, good. As maybe you answered this, did you address, this whole thing about soy can be complicated, and we were told not to eat soy, and then it was, that study that came out from Japan about that women who ate more were better in terms of their odds for breast cancer. But what about for children? Some of us have heard that children under 4 can't eat soy. Is that a problem?
So soy is a very healthy food for children. I would say the only thing, and not the only thing, one of the things you might have to consider in children is when we consider the top 8 allergens, soy is in that list. So some kids can have a soy allergy. And when I say soy allergy, I mean a type 1 allergy that can cause anaphylaxis. So for those children, soy is absolutely, should be avoided. The other caveat is in babies that are born prematurely, soy formulas are not a good option. Aside from that, soy is a very healthy food. And I think a couple of servings of soy a day for children, even under the age of 4, is perfectly healthy. Having said that, if there's a family that's opposed to soy or is reluctant, you can certainly eat a plant-based diet that does not include soy. But I think for my own family and my own experience, soy foods are one of the most accessible, easy, and enjoyable foods for children, because tofu in a stir fry or having a fortified soy milk, even edamame, these are foods that kids tend to really enjoy. And so unless you have a good reason, I would not eliminate soy in the diet, even if of young children.
Okay, great. And then
some
one
of
other
some of the
question.
studies that had this sort of, I think the common concern in pediatrics is, well, for my son, won't it have estrogenizing effects and have breast development and things like that? And there have been only 2 case reports. And in those case reports, it was like, I think there were the 2 men that were consuming like 15, 20 servings of soy a day. So don't do that. Any food, we wouldn't recommend consuming 15, 20 servings, but 2 to 3 servings of soy food, whether it's soy milk or edamame or tofu, is perfectly reasonable for children.
Okay, great. Did you answer the concern that Jennifer in the introduction talked about? And this is more for an adult probably, but you know, as an adult who's trying to lose weight and then the family is eating the foods that this person was eating before, do you have any suggestions on, you know, how do you deal with that? Because weekends are the toughest thing.
Yeah, and I think that trying to create a little bit of structure and routine even on the weekends can be helpful. And I think, you know, when my family transitioned, this isn't specifically related to weight loss, but in terms of what to do when the family is not fully on board or different family members are doing different things. When I first went plant-based, not my whole family was on board. And the thing is, you cannot dictate what somebody else does, especially older children or an adult. But what you can do is to ask for some compassion and some respect. And so what that looked like in our family is, you know, I didn't demand that everyone sort of change what they did, but I did say what felt comfortable for me. And so in our family, if we went out to dinner, people sort of made their own choices, but in the home, we didn't have any animal foods. And that worked really well. So even if you can't get full agreement from everybody else in the household, you can ask for respect, you can ask for compassion, and maybe ask for ways that they might be able to support you. You know, I don't know if that fully answers the question.
That's the perfect
Yeah.
answer.
That's great. And what did you talk about underweight children?
So I think just as with underweight and overweight children, I think it's really important to get to the why of why it's happening, especially for a child that may have been sort of trending along a certain percentile, and then you see a plateau or a drop. That's always a concerning sign in a child. So trying to understand, you know, doing a very thorough diet history, understanding if there are other problems that might be going on, and then looking for an underlying medical problem, such as reflux or hyperthyroidism or things like that. But, you know, typically for plant-based children that might be having trouble gaining weight, you want to sort of increase what might be the opposite for a lot of people in this group, increase some of the more calorically dense foods like nut butters and avocado and things like that.
Well, that can help us that we can remember, oh, if I'm trying to lose weight, maybe those aren't the ones I'm going to choose.
Right.
Okay. Were there any other questions that we had thought about or that were in the chat that
I have a question
yeah.
about, I've heard there's a relationship with cow's milk and type 1 diabetes. Can you address that?
Yeah, so some of the earlier research did show a possible link between cow's milk and the onset of type 1 diabetes. And the more recent data is not quite as conclusive. So I think what we thought about that relationship is not actually quite true. Now, having said that, we know that cow's milk has a whole host of sort of potentially negative health outcomes. There was a really great article that was published last year in the New England Journal of Medicine from the Harvard group called Milk and Health. And I highly recommend that people look at that article. And in the article, they basically make the case that in communities that are not food insecure, so you have plenty of access to food, that there's a strong case for, you know, reducing, if not eliminating, our consumption of cow's milk. Unfortunately, that link between cow's milk and type 1 diabetes is not quite as clear cut. So I don't think we can say, you know, drinking milk is going to cause type 1 diabetes, but it has been linked to prostate cancer. And it's, you know, dairy is actually the #1 source of saturated fat in the United States. So that is reason enough to consider sort of decreasing our consumption of cow's milk and dairy in general.
And what about the, is there a nutritional link with autism?
Again, I think the two foods that have been shown in some kids to have sort of a modulating effect are dairy and gluten. But whenever parents are looking to eliminate foods in terms of autism and some of the other neurodevelopmental conditions, I highly recommend that they work with a pediatrician and a dietitian that's experienced, because oftentimes what I find is that parents will end up doing these elimination diets, and they end up really restricting a lot of foods unnecessarily in a child's diet. So there has been some data to suggest that gluten and dairy are places where you could begin for kids who have autism.
Dr. Shaw, do you see a lot of children with fatty liver issues?
No, personally, I haven't, but I know that it's a growing problem,
Yeah.
especially when they have that sort of metabolic syndrome of diabetes and things like that. So definitely fatty liver is more common a problem in pediatrics. We didn't used to see that, but we have over the last decade or so.
And the recommendations would be pretty much the same as clean up the diet. Yeah.
I think that sometimes it's the simple solutions that are sort of right in front of us. But I think that oftentimes it can be difficult to implement, but it's, eat plant-centered, plant-focused, or exclusively plant-based diet, physically active, stress, sleep, all these things.
So you just highlighted all of the components of lifestyle medicine. And I'm just wondering, is there, because I'm a lifestyle medicine coach, and I'm just wondering, is there a component for children in coaching?
That's an interesting question. I think that as for children, it's really about setting the stage for developing these habits and behaviors from the very get-go. I think that a lot of times having overly complicated conversations with children can be challenging, but I think for parents to model the behavior, it seems so simple, but really it's modeling the behavior and making the healthy choice the easy choice for children. And then they don't, I remember one time my son used to go to a school when he was younger where they had sort of family style meals, where that was like they would all sit at the table with the teacher and the food would sort of be brought. And I remember the teacher once commented, she said, your son is the only one that goes to the salad bar every day.
Wow.
And I thought, well, I didn't have a conversation with him. I didn't say, you need to go to the salad bar and you need to make sure you have a salad at lunch every day. It's just something he did because it's part of his routine and habit,
Yeah. I came from the school district, and I have been in the cafeterias after lunch and seeing all of the fruit that was thrown away.
Yeah.
One of the things that the food service ladies would tell me or would share is that a lot of the kids don't know what a plum is, or they don't necessarily know what this fruit is, so they don't eat it. And so that's kind of alarming,
Well, and I know it's not accessible to people everywhere. I imagine in Florida, you have pretty good produce as well. But in California, when we moved here about 8 years ago, and when I tell you the farmer's market is really an integral part of our life, it's like my children, they understand what it means to eat seasonally. And, my son gets excited when it's pluot season, like pluot season. Who would, think that? But he understands like how delicious they are. And it's such a treat. And it comes from exposure, and it comes from that sort of tactile and visual experience of, going to the market and seeing that there's been a change. Like even now it's springtime here. So we're starting to see asparagus and all these other things, and exposing kids to that. And when kids have had a hand in sort of tasting and selecting and growing and doing all these things, it just gets them excited for it.
right. Yeah.
I love your quote, make the healthy choice the easy choice. I mean, that is just so perfect, because if it's easy, that's going to be the choice.
Right.
Exactly. And if it's healthy, perfect.
Yeah.
I like that.
And even, sometimes I have to remind myself of that too. If I take, when we come home from the market, like right now, strawberries are coming in season. If I, wash them and slice them up and put them in a bowl and put them on the table, they're gone by the afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes I wish somebody would cut up stuff for me and have it ready.
Oh, well, I think you got an envelope from us, Reshma.
Oh, yes, I did.
Oh,
You wanna
yes.
pull it out?
It's time for that.
Open it.
Should I open it now?
Yes.
Okay.
That's actually a fancy looking envelope.
It's very pretty. Oh, look at this.
Oh, cute.
That is cute.
Oh, this is wonderful. I will put this to good use in my kitchen for sure. Oh, it's like one of these, I think, crisscrosses and wraps. I think this is going to be fantastic. Thank you so much. This is so very thoughtful of
Thank
you.
you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Well, that is a quote from your book, and it sort of sums up the book. I thought it was near the beginning. You know, I mean, it's not a quote; it's the gist of a quote. That when you have plant-based diets, the wonderful thing is, and you could probably say that better than me.
This is such a special gift and so thoughtful. I can't even thank you enough. It's very, very sweet.
There's something in the pocket,
Oh, okay.
and it is. You don't need to read the note now, but there's something else that's there too.
Oh, I love that.
So it's a little pin that matches the little earth heart that's on the apron too.
Oh, that is wonderful. Thank you so much. It's incredibly thoughtful of you.
Thank you for Zooming today. We really appreciate it. And were there any more questions before we close out?
I do have one more question. You've been so gracious answering all of our questions and so thoroughly. Is there anything that you didn't get to say because we didn't ask that you would like to say about your book or our children or whatever?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me and for these very thoughtful gifts. It's been such a pleasure chatting with everyone today. I think the thing that I would really sort of emphasize for families and really for anybody is to just, no matter where you are, you can start, and to focus on progress, and really to have a lot of compassion for yourself and for your families, and to approach this as a journey that's filled with love for yourself, love for our families, love for the planet, love for animals. And it really is just a beautiful, compassionate, joyful way of living. And I really encourage people to just kind of start no matter where they are. And, you know, every little step that we make makes the next one a bit easier.
Perfect. Perfect ending. Thank you.